Okay, I'd like to ask you, what's the key difference between Bear Stearns, Lehman, Merrill, Morgan Stanley, Goldman? And why have Morgan Stanley, Goldman survived while the other three going under?
I don't really think there was much difference among any of the firms. You know how they say birth order is important? I think death order was important here. Because if Lehman it was March 2008, and it was Lehman that was convulsing, and people had lost confidence in them, I think they probably would have been rescued. I think JP Morgan would have been forced to buy them. And if it was Bear Stearns in September of 2008, there would have been no one there to buy them, and they would have gone under. Merrill, basically now we know, was forced by Bernanke and Paulson to be bought by Bank of America. And the reason that they did that is they saw what happened after the Lehman explosion. If Merrill exploded, which would have been even more consequential than Lehman, then Morgan Stanley, now you're talking about the king and queen of the realm. And Morgan Stanley was literally being read the last rites before it got saved by a Japanese bank at the 11th hour and 59 seconds. And there was and Goldman Sachs was next. And to me, as I wrote in the New York Times a couple weeks ago, I really can visualize in a serious way a connection between Treasury Secretary Paulson, former CEO of Goldman Sachs, Treasury Secretary Rubin, the former CEO of Goldman Sachs, John Bolton, the Chief of Staff of the Bush White House, Steve Friedman, the head of the New York Fed, picking the next head of the New York Fed, William Dudley, former Goldman economist. I don't think it is too much to wonder why the only banker in the room when Paulson decided and Bernanke decided to save AIG was Lloyd Blankfein, the CEO of Goldman Sachs, and then Goldman Sachs got a $13 billion check from AIG via our pocketbooks. There's not really a mystery to this. I think it's pretty clear. All of these firms were in the business of huge amounts of leverage, borrowing short and lending long, and they were all a different version of a house of cards, and the smaller ones fell because they fell first, and the bigger ones were saved. So it was about as close as he got to admitting his own role in any of this is when you're grading your own homework, this is what happens. So Wall Street was grading its own homework. It was marking these securities, and as I write in the book, what happened in the hedge funds was the tip of the iceberg, as you said. And it began to go bad in April of 2007 because one of the players on Wall Street, as I write in the book, Goldman Sachs, our friend Goldman Sachs, decided that the value of all these securities that everybody had been trading amongst themselves and marking at 99, 98, 97 cents on the dollar as cracks started to appear, they decided in April 2007 to mark these securities at 50 cents on the dollar. And they reported that information to the hedge funds at Bear Stearns, and Bear Stearns was forced to admit to its investors that the fund had lost 20% in the month of April as opposed to 6% in the month of April. And that was the beginning of the end. And that's all written in here, and you can read about this. But the truth is, and people like David Einhorn were saying this for a long time, that the accounting on Wall Street is a sham. I had a piece in the FT last week where I talked about the first quarter earnings on Wall Street, which I think were manufactured to try to promote confidence among everybody out there in the world, because any more bad news about Wall Street was going to take us all down, the thinking was.
Now, okay, where do you see the future of Wall Street now because of this? What do you see happening?
So part of me sees big changes, like everybody, huge amounts of much needed regulation, because these guys on Wall Street cannot police themselves. It's just, they've proven that again and again and again. So, and I think that the compensation system on Wall Street, which was completely out of hand and generated the wrong incentives for people, and I know this was, I'm a beneficiary of it myself, but I know that it was out of hand, and know it was incorrect, and know that it resulted in the excess and the bubbles and bursts that we've had in the last 25 years. I think to some extent that has started to correct. And I say all of this reservedly and with some concern, because unfortunately human nature is such that this is not the first period of excess that was resulted in a huge financial crisis, and it probably isn't going to be the last one either. So what happens is Wall Street is very, very good at getting rid of the people with any institutional memory. Just like I was fired, when you get to be a certain age, you get kicked out the door because you become too expensive, and only one or two people can get to the top. Everybody else has to go, and there's no loyalty on either side of the equation anymore.
But anyone, one last question. What is your next book? And we can come back once you've published it and talk to us again, because we're really happy you're here.
Well, thank you. As I said, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me. So my book, in this book, I really was fortunate that I got access to a lot of people at Bear Stearns. They spoke freely to me. I spent a lot of time with Tim Geithner, and that was very revealing as well, and other members of the government. So I was very fortunate to have this access, and I was fortunate that this was my full-time job, and was able to write it relatively quickly and get it out there for people to read. And I think part of the success of the book is that it was out there, among the very first books, and the first that was sort of fully reported and explained it all. I mean, I like to say that this book is the Rosetta Stone. You all remember the Rosetta Stone of the financial crisis, in that, if you want to understand what happened at Lehman and Merrill and Citi and all these firms, if you can understand what happened at Bear Stearns, you understand what happened at all of them.